Good morning, everybody. So I'm Helen Tiplady. I'm the producer for Aladdin, which is our Christmas show this year at the Cornwall Playhouse. And I'm joined with Julian and Nick, and I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves.
So I'm Julian Boast, and I am the Chief Executive and Creative Director of Hall for Cornwall. And with my Aladdin hat on, I'm the Executive Producer.
My name's Nick Evans. I'm directing the pantomime this year at Hall for Cornwall. I work as a theatre director internationally and on a lot of West End shows, and thrilled to be doing my first Hall for Cornwall panto.
And we're sat in a dressing room just while the set is being brought in and constructed at the moment. So we're backstage, sat in the dressing room. And Julian, I wondered if you could just set the scene a little bit for us about panto.
So I think panto is a really interesting concept in terms of, obviously, it dates back to pre-Victorian times and has a sort of remarkable technique about cloths and actions, and do you enter from the left or the right, or do you have principal boys or principal girls? And I think if you jump now to the 21st century and you look at the stock of panto across the country, very particular in Cornwall is the village halls, and they all open after Christmas, and they play for a long time. And if you go to Scotland, you know, Scotland has an extraordinary technique of really what I would say pure panto, in terms of, if you think of the Stanley Baxters and the things that just the amazing at the King's Theatre. And then if you circle back round to the South Coast, we're, I think, probably a little more mannered. I think we're probably slightly different as you move up north. And there is a tradition, there is a saying that you never bring a working class dame further than Oxford. So there are all sorts of parameters around panto that I think we as an industry understand, but actually what's important is what we bring to here and in Cornwall. And what's your sort of experience of a panto?
Well, I grew up in Wales, and so interestingly, I think Wales, although it's geographically different, sits in that kind of northern tradition, you know, so you definitely have a link with the kind of working class dames, almost what we would recognise as the Les Dawson, Roy Barraclough dame, you know, that's very much the process. But yeah, again, in many different ways, you know, I mean, panto still exists in sixth form colleges. The rugby club is a really interesting one in Wales, because the rugby club will often do their panto. There's a very famous one in Taibach in Talbot where it's known as one of the best pantos in Wales, because all those kind of like burly rugby players suddenly are queuing up to play the dame that year, you know. So I think that's interesting. I think the other element that I've been thinking about a lot through this process is also the history of variety. And, you know, how much realise I'm referencing Morecambe and Wise or Les Dawson or Bruce Forsyth, because I think I'm the last generation in some ways of people who grew up with that as a regular staple on Saturday night, and the routines and the stylistics that they would have known. And, you know, I sort of witnessed the TV networks realising they could do more hours of TV more cheaply by making it reality contests. And I think something is lost, and I think panto is actually, in a really important way, the kind of the laboratory where that survives, where that style of comedy, that style of playing, and that unique warmth that panto has, which was very much Sunday night at the Palladium, was very much, you know, the Generation Game, those shows that I would have grown up with. It lives on in panto. So I think it's becoming in some ways more important as theatre has changed and as TV has changed.
And often when I'm referencing panto, I mean, I was lucky to see Les Dawson, and I saw him, I think it was in Babes in the Woods at the Mayflower, probably 25, 30 years ago. And before that curtain went up, you knew there was anarchy, and you knew there was tension, and you knew that he was going to run that show. And that's because you'd seen him on television and you'd seen what he was going to give. But there's something about, I think what you have to do in a really good panto is you have to have that anticipation that you're going to have the best time ever, and you're going to laugh and cry for 2 hours. And it's a really difficult note to say to people, is to, you've got to have that anarchy, but that anarchy has to be contained. And of course, variety did that. It was absolutely pure technique. And actually, one of the things I've long thought about actually is that, of course, those front cloths had those brilliant variety actors that could hold the action before, as you were setting up behind it. And is there a modern day invention of indeed circus skills or any of that stuff that maybe that's 2-3 years far ahead for us to sort of think about?
Yeah, well, you know, some pantos are sort of hiding that by going very technical and going for, you know, these kind of very whizzy sets where everything is animated and everything. And I think that's great. That's something to be explored. But the purity of what you're talking about, the purity of what you're talking about, the people you have paid to see with their toes on the edge of the orchestra pit, so close, you know. And it's that line that a good comedian, a good dame, a good villain will do, that you feel in that audience you're being spoken to directly. And what you also referenced there, Julian, in a really interesting way is that you know, we think of those variety acts as being the escape when people had really hard lives in pits, in, you know, textile factories in those Welsh towns. The escape was that one trip to the theatre at Christmas. The escape was that, you know, 1 hour of television on the Sunday night. But I think in a different way, now we live in the social media world and we live in the rolling news, we need that escape even more. Goodness knows that as the news cycle sort of encroaches on our lives even more, to just be given permission to laugh and feel safe and feel warm. And I think what you're talking about there, which I think is really interesting, is there is anarchy, but it's safe anarchy.
Absolutely.
You know there is a line that will not be crossed, you know, and that's the key to getting the panto right, is drawing the parameters. And I think they can be different everywhere. I think that can be different in the village hall than it is in a commercial theatre, and different again in a lovely producing house like Hall for Cornwall, where you know your audience. And that's been one of the things I've been trying to learn from the brilliant staff here, the brilliant cast who come from Cornwall, because I think we're about a third Cornish, trying to learn what it is an audience wants, because it would be a terrible mistake to come and impose something different. You have to find a symbiotic relationship where you have ideas, and you certainly as a director, you do some of that controlling, but you're also allowing things to blossom and grow so that line between audience and cast is almost imperceptible.
And I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think what we try and do at Hall for Cornwall is we will spend a year on a show, whereas actually quite often other shows will be put together in 2 or 3 weeks. And so it's important for us to be able to rehearse it with a decent amount of time. It's important to get the creatives on board a year ahead. And it's about, you're quite right, Nick, it's about that purity and about the craft and about the honesty. That's, I think, what we really want to do within Cornwall Playhouse Productions.
And sometimes you're in rehearsal and you have, you know, 7 or 8 moments, and you think, yes, that's funny, and it's a little bit carry on, it's a little bit risque, and that's funny. And then I will suddenly go, I don't like that one. That feels a bit cruel, or that feels a little bit. And as a cast and as a company, you sort of know instinctively as you work where that line is, because you've let it grow. And you know, you talk about things being done in 3 weeks for very good reasons. Many theatres around the country have a panto that's actually existed for 7 or 8 years and has been, you know, changed and so, because it's just gone from one venue to another. But to have something that's homegrown, it feels very, very exciting to be a part of.
And I wonder, can you just build on that a little bit more about why Aladdin?
Well, you know, Aladdin was already the proposal before I got involved, but my heart fluttered when I heard it was Aladdin, because the first thing I said it's my favourite because it's an absolute romp. You know, there are other pantos that lean more into being a love story. There are others that lean more into building a specific type of world, but Aladdin is, I think I said in one of my notes that it's race around the world, but you know, so there is an adventure, and that is so exciting to work on, because what you can do then, which is a real, and I'm sure the cast would tell you this, I love pace, I love things to keep moving, I don't want things to get stuck. So that energy of moving and moving. Obviously, in this day and age, you have to really think deeply about Aladdin. But I think what we have done, and what I'm proud of, is we haven't thought of it as a difficult thing. We've thought of it as an opportunity. You know, we live in an age where I'm Welsh, but I feel like I'm part of Truro. I feel like after a few weeks I belong here. And how could you tell a story about belonging? So we have this wonderful family at the centre of our story, who are different genders, different ethnicities, different ages, but that's okay. That's, you belong, you know? And so I felt there was an opportunity to really enjoy that. And the brilliance of the writing by Richard and Ed is they immediately went to, how do we protect the traditions of Aladdin, but also make it Cornish? So it was never a difficult thing to think of Aladdin. It was a possibility. Hence, you know, we have our character Willie Washaway, which is a Cornish town, and it feels like we're nodding to the tradition of a name that would have been used regularly in Panto, but we're making it our own, and we're saying, you know, history plus, I call it.
And I think when you have a sense of belonging, actually what your script does, it never mocks. And so one of the things that really irritates me about many pantomimes is it mocks a town or it mocks something else, and actually that's just wasted energy in terms of actors' time and audiences. It's much better to have a sense of belonging, and all of our pantomimes, Christmas shows over the years have always had that really deep roots of being in Cornwall, and if you start there, then the audiences are just on your side and they're going to have the best time ever.
And when you get that belonging right, then you can have fun.
Yeah.
Because if you are from a place and you do belong, it's okay to tease a town or tease a place name or tease each other, because that's your voice to do it in. You know, that we have some characters who very deliberately have outside accents. They don't have any of the jokes that tease place names, because that becomes aggressive in a way you can't have.
And not for a spoiler, but I think we have probably 50 place names in this show at some point.
Yeah. It's been an education. Absolutely. I was saying, you know, I think the script is so brilliant. I saw Richard and Ed's light up. I went, this script deserves to be done again. You know? They said, what, here? And I went, well, yeah, maybe in time. But actually, how do we change the 50 place names to Welsh place names so we can sell it to Swansea or to Cardiff next year?
Yeah.
So I love how you talk about that, and I love that kind of warmth and belonging that comes through from that. So I just wonder if there's is there something you can tell us about what surprised you so far? Is there anything that you weren't maybe expecting that's surprising you in this process?
Well, I think the answer to that is that the work from the venue was so thorough. Probably the surprises came early in the year, you know. It was when we were sort of first talking about what the show should be and first meeting, you know, our Dame. And again, there's no spoiler, because if you've seen the poster, our Dame has a beard, which is quite unusual. And I kind of thought long and hard about that. That felt like a bit untraditional. But you can't imagine anything else, because Ed's Dame wouldn't work if he shaved. And I don't know what that is. So I think what you've got to do is, it's not so much surprises, but I always say that there's two things you have to as a director. Number one, 90% of the work happens before you ever get into the rehearsal room. It's in the casting and in the script work and in the discussions and in talking to the venue. But I think the other thing that happens is every day is a school day, you know. I'm not in a room, you know, saying this is how it will be. I hope we're creating an environment where I say, here's an idea, and the actors feel they have the space to go, can I try something else? And you go, okay, that's funnier than what I did, you know, so that you create something. So I think I'm learning, really, rather than being surprised. You know, it's a new, and I think we'll go on to talk about this. It is, a lot of my work has been on either Shakespeare or commercial musicals, and there are links from both of those things to what we do in Panto, but it is a different and unique form all of its own.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things which might be surprising for people that are listening to this podcast is that actually any ego that anybody has in the process is left alone, is left outside the rehearsal room, because actually when you're doing those gags, when you are working on stuff on the floor, it's actually if somebody's got a brilliant idea and it gets through the gag machine or it's funny, actually you put it in. If it isn't, you cut it. So I think the bit I think, you know, is surprising is that it's a massive team effort and everybody has a part to play in making it work.
Yeah, I think my role as director then is, you know, you have to find a balance between opening that space to try things and to play, because it is a form that has a playfulness and has a daftness about it when it's done right. So you don't want to, you know, I was reading Judi Dench's book and she said the best rehearsal rooms are the rooms where there's laughter. because she says if you're laughing, you feel safe, you feel you can try things, and that extends to then an audience. So I think you are looking to do that, but also just having a little 5% of your brain going, but I will make the final calls. Because otherwise the anarchy becomes in the rehearsal room and not on the stage. And I think, but the key to that is saying the why. You know, I try to say to the actors, I don't think we can do that, because it puts 3 extra beats and we need to move the story on, so that the actors feel there's a reason why when you do cut across or block something, you try to give the reason why, because then I think they understand, and that stops the ego from ever growing. It doesn't become a power battle because you're all after the same thing.
And listeners to this podcast, I popped into rehearsals yesterday, and actually you hadn't noticed I was in until I waved goodbye, and I'd been in there for 20 minutes. And what I watched was, of course, it is a fun factory, everybody's laughing, but you have to work 110, 120% to make sure that everything is productive in that moment, and because it's time limited and there's a lot of energy going around. So what seemed to be effortless, I looked at you and thought, you must be tired at the end of the day.
Well, I don't get tired in the day because I'm having such fun. I mean, that sounds like such a glib thing to say, but I do feel like, you know, being paid to be in a Panto rehearsal room. This is like fantastic. And then I go home and my bones remind me I'm not 26 anymore. And I go, oh, okay.
Oh, and you've just touched on it a little bit, but could you? I mean, I've loved being around the rehearsal room and hearing the laughter, and also hearing your stories of other things that you've worked on and other shows. So, can you tell us a little bit more about you and about what other things you've been doing?
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, I grew up in Wales and in a sort of a fairly working class area of Swansea, and I really, really enjoyed that sort of background. That's been I always say I went to a comprehensive school, and it was a comprehensive education, because you were valued if you did theatre, or valued if you played in the rugby team, and that was probably something that really did shape me. And then worked as an actor for a little while, but I don't think I was very good if looking back. But I think having had that experience of being in the space was great. To a large extent, to cut a very long and rambling story short, a lot of my work has been in West End musical theatre. First as an associate director, who's the person, again for listeners, who looks after a show and recasts a show and notes a show, and then more latterly doing my own work both nationally and internationally. So shows I've done are things like Billy Elliot the musical, Mary Poppins, Mamma Mia. So, you know, again, things you can learn from. Those stylistics of those shows are warm and exciting and fast moving, and you're aware all the time that you're bringing those things in. But one thing I always say is when I did Billy Elliot, I had the great privilege. It was Bruce Forsyth's 80th birthday.
Wow.
And I was asked to direct a segment between one of the Billy Elliots, who was from Cornwall, from Saltash, the one we chose, and Bruce. And so I got an afternoon directing Bruce Forsyth, and I thought about it lots, because there was nothing that man didn't know about comic timing and shtick and warmth. And so just to have spent an afternoon in his company was a privilege.
And what was he like?
Wonderful. That same thing that, you know, I went in perhaps slightly nervous about the ego, and perhaps slightly nervous about, and I was met by the head of light entertainment at the BBC, who handled Strictly, and you kind of get yourself into a place like I'm dealing with someone who's so much more experienced than me, and so much. And you know what? It was just the easiest thing, because when people are that good, there's a reason why. Yeah. And I remember there was a moment where Josh, who was the Billy from Saltash, had to go into splits, and Bruce would like lean on the stool and go, half tonight, half tomorrow. And I said, or alternatively, Bruce, I said, you could go, Josh could go higher, and you could go lower. And Bruce went, I love that. So it was exactly that same exchange of things, you know. He was very kind to me, and the briefest of interactions, but very lucky to have shared in that golden thread, because he would have said he learned from the Norman Evanses and the great song and dance men that went before him, and then he did it for a while, and it passes on, you know, and in Panto we have to keep that alive.
And I think it's one of the great privileges of being in a theatre, in a venue, that you get to work with amazing people. And it goes back to that humility and leaving your ego outside of the front door, is that we're all there to learn. And actually, I've met huge stars, and they've been brilliant, fantastic human beings, because they're in that learning cycle, and it's that golden thread that, you know, works throughout our industry.
Well, the experience has been repeated this week because I had the great privilege, as you know, we've announced that Dawn French is the voice of our genie. And so I sort of said, Helen, you said, do you want to work with her? I said, well, it's Dawn French. I think she's going to know how to be funnier far more easily than I am. But offer her, I'll go and meet her, or we'll do it, over Zoom and stuff. And it was just the dreamiest hour because she was warm, she knew what she was doing. I was able quickly to give a little brief. She said, okay, yeah, I get that. Asked a couple of questions. And just that level of knowledge that someone as brilliant as Dawn has accrued over a lifetime of working at the highest level. It's you just feel like you're swimming in her wake when you work there, And so then she did it and did it brilliant. I said, do you want to go again? She said, yeah, I'd like another go. I said, well, here's a couple of things. And immediately, someone I'd never met before, it was interactive. And as I said to her, the reason to approach her was we want this panto to be the 3 W's, warm, witty, and about women as much as men. And Dawn absolutely represents that. So it was a joy to have that. And again, there's the next one, right? I got to work with Bruce Forsyth and I got to work briefly with Dawn French. And those two things are equal honours for me.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. We need to get you back up to the rehearsal room now.
Yeah, I better get my shorts on and back into the rehearsal room. I always wear shorts.
Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much. Thanks for all that insight. And do come and see the show. Tickets are available on our website, and we open on the 5th of December. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.